Thanks. How are you?
I am doing, oh, it's per Aspera. I always get it slightly wrong. I'm doing well, my friend.
Good, good, excellent.
One thing I've got to say, I didn't realize you were pumping out more content than me.
I'm just trying to figure out how to even do content
I
still.
like it. I
So
like the flavor. It's Jeff in his authentic space. I see the bookshelf in the background. It feels like home.
it is home. This is the home office.
Love it. Jeff, I'd love a little bit of like intro and background on you to begin with, and then we can just get into a 45-minute slog of just actively talking about the space.
You got it. So I've basically spent my entire career back and forth between deep tech startups and VC. Started off focused on biomedical technology because I came from a family of doctors that owned a clinical research organization, but decided that medical school wasn't in the menu for me. So 2008 focused on climate and energy investing. Um, After which, I wanted to stay in VC, but I didn't really feel credible because I wasn't really technical and I wasn't really operational at that point in my career. So that I decided the next decade I was going to spend going as deep as I could in a number of different areas. And I worked on core technology around micro LED displays, sensors, optics, computer vision, real-time rendering, a lot of AR, VR stuff. But that eventually led me to space and defense background. Well, actually, I guess my first introduction was around 2012. I helped my brother get his space startup off the ground that was doing very low Earth orbit imaging. And then found myself over at Viasat, a more traditional satellite communications company and prime defense contractor before I went back to the dark side and became a VC again. But today, I'm still doing investing. I've been investing my own money for a bit. So I was first checking the companies like Castilian and True um, and we'll be getting back to that soon, hopefully, in a more formal fashion. So, currently supporting a company called Blacklake. That's a defense holding company. We work with a lot of early stage defense startups on helping them grow as rapidly as possible, winning grants, lobbying appropriation, helping them with manufacturing, and then business development capture because we have a whole generation of founders that haven't really been exposed to this market before.
Agreed.
So helping them walk through those halls, meet the right people, and get inside the right rooms is where we excel, and that's pretty global actually. So that's what I'm doing today, and my focus is really helping the earliest stage founders go from 0 to 1. And I think investing is the best way I know to do that.
All right, let's get to it. Defense, sovereignty, AI are like topics at the forefront of my mind when it comes to you, right? We had a great conversation about Europe, about the US, and the different flavors that we bring to defense. I want to I want to step back for a moment. You look at the landscape today. You look at Europe and investing deeply in defense. America has obviously been doing that for a considerable period of time. Um, when you look at the two different flavors, what do you see? With companies like Andrino on one side and then Helsing on the other. Andrino is very outspoken as an example. Helsing it feels a little bit quieter, underrated, but equally as innovative in their own right. Thoughts?
I think I think there's very different sort of founding ethos
Mm-hmm.
in the United States versus Europe. And I think that manifests itself on the investment side as well. So one of the marked differences are, the size of rounds, the amount of funding at, earlier stages in the US, um, which gives companies the ability to accelerate more. Um, but they also have the benefit of being in a less fragmented market that is much, much larger as well. So, it's a little bit different in Europe. I'm glad Europe's spending on their own sovereignty and defense. I think that's important because, too much dependency can create problems in the future. So I think it's really important. It's a tricky one though, because these aren't companies I worry about the health of these companies when there isn't an active war and the level of investment might
Hmm.
not be as great. So it might not be there to support these companies, through the life cycle of those businesses. And, there are funding gaps in Europe that we don't have in the US, which are, pretty much Series A and beyond for a lot of quote unquote deep tech companies is pretty non-existent in Europe. There's tons of early stage funding, but not much to follow on. So that means these returns will get narrowed pretty quickly across that industry. So it's a bit there's a lot of nuances to the European market that don't exist in the U.S. market. And why I think you see a lot of those companies going, back and forth, trying to sell into the U.S. or trying to sell Americans trying to sell into Europe. Um, the other thing of note is, you know, Europe's not the only defense market in the world, and I think some of the focus is starting to shift from Europe towards the Pacific region, namely competition with China. So, there's still a lot of blue ocean to go after, I think. But, my concern is Ukraine winds down, what's going to happen to all these defense startups in Europe? Because it's not as if they can just fully switch over to the US. There are biases on either side.
It's a very interesting time. We've talked at length around how the Cold War was a seriously innovative period post World War II, or during World War II, there was a seriously innovative period. And obviously, with the war in Ukraine and Russia, we have another innovative period in the context of innovation because supply chains gets hit. We have to figure out how to solve those problems faster, leaner than ever before. Yeah, I'm looking forward past that curve and thinking, what happens next in your head? Do we just does the focus shift to something else? Does there become a breakdown in funding? Do they end up taking capital from, or the European companies end up taking capital from American VCs and the capitalization coming in from the US? What do you see on your end?
Well, we're starting to see some of that actually. There's, Peter Thiel recently backed Stark Industries,
Hmm. What a
and
name
I
of a
think
company, by the
Sequoia.
way.
Yeah, it's a great name. I think Sequoia participated in that as well. General Catalyst is active in Europe. So we're definitely seeing um, Americans come more in this direction than the other way around. Um, and I think, part of that is there's just better capitalization in the US, and they can outcompete a lot of funds that are relatively small by comparison. So
Hmm.
they just do a slightly larger round, and then it blows up the economics for a lot of smaller, earlier stage funds in Europe.
Yeah, we've got Maria on next, and we're getting into the VC math about these larger funds and pulling down. But I want to talk about the sovereignty aspect of this. It feels like national security today is a word that the Americans have thrown around for a long time. Obviously, with Black Lake, it's on the site. You invest in national security or companies that help protect national security. Um, do you look at the AI infrastructure of like owning our own data centers as part of that sovereignty as well?
Um,
Because it's now not just weapons or defense as a or yeah, defense specifically, but it's also the technology that sits underneath that.
yeah, absolutely. I think, that was maybe part of the reason why scale AI was such a big deal for
Mm.
Meta and why they were willing to pay 14 billion for half that company. Um,
Your thoughts, good buy or a bad buy?
well, I, I didn't understand it honestly because it was a little bit of an open secret that there wasn't a whole lot of AI involved and that they had leagues of people overseas manually labeling this stuff for you know pretty low rates, and what that translates to is a lot of human error and low quality data labeling, and then all of a sudden it's not as valuable as it once appeared.
Hmm.
So it doesn't look like it was a good buy.
And so to the point of sovereignty in the technology as well.
Yeah. So I think that's important because without sovereignty of the data, that can be tampered with, and you can get results from the AI that you weren't expecting or wanting. So it can be tampered with, is what it is. And to ensure that, yeah, you have to guarantee some kind of provenance and sovereignty of that data itself. Does that complicate things? Yes, but it's not as if we haven't been here before. There's very simple analogies to the proliferation of the internet and how we handled that. So I don't think this is a dramatically new problem.
It's just the same problem in a different flavor.
Basically, yeah.
I want to know, what do you go to bed with thinking about in the context of the spaces you're investing in? What do you look at on that, 10, 15, 20-year horizon? Whether that's Europe, whether that's war, whether that's something else completely, space.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's really important right now is let's go back to AI for a second, actually, because there's I think my ego might say no way that AI could ever do VC,
Hmm.
but nowadays there's actually evidence that even some of the earlier generation LLMs are better at recognizing or predicting founder success
I've
than
literally got up the
VCs,
VC bench, like on the laptop, on the computer right now, and I'm looking at this. It blows my mind.
and not by a small margin either, right?
Mm-mm.
So, so maybe my ego could be wrong in this scenario, and that VC is largely AIable in some way.
What does that mean for
So
you then?
yeah, so my personal view is that AI is only as useful as the lived experience of the person using it.
Hmm.
So for example, it's not as if somebody who's um, I don't know, let's just say a poet is going to be able to get onto an LLM and figure out that this startup has the next best version of Fusion and that it's going to be successful for all these reasons and that they should invest. Um, I think we're pretty far away from that happening. So you still need domain expertise and lived experience to qualify some of these companies, especially in deep tech, where some of these signal metrics for founder success might not be as obvious. So I still think lived experience counts for quite a bit.
You talk about the signal metrics. When you're investing in deep tech, what do you look for? What have you figured out that other people don't understand about the relevant spaces you invest in, national security, space, AI, etc., defense?
My personal view is that a lot of hard tech traces back to breakthroughs in basic physics, in chemistry and electrical engineering and things like that. So I find it really, really difficult to find a signal in a company
Hmm.
if I can't understand whether or not their technology is commercially or is viable, whether it's selling to the government or commercially. Um, that's hard to understand without first principles. So the way I try and make myself repeatably successful is by doing that homework that most VCs don't do. Like I dig into the physics, I try and really understand whether or not this particular technology can win. And it's not just whether or not it's more efficient. I mean, the economics have to work out, the build and capex have to work out. A lot of different things have to work out. So that's one of the things that I focus on that I don't think a lot of VCs can because they just don't have the lived experience in building things like you know rockets and missiles and antennas and sensors and optics and all these sorts of things. They require a number of different disciplines. So that's one thing I hone in on. But then there are other signals I look for that I'm sure a lot of other VCs hone in on. So the quality of the team, the founder fit. And I'm not just looking for pedigree. Like I don't care if somebody was at Palantir for 2 years. It doesn't mean they're going to know how to build a satellite.
Agreed.
It means they can probably raise a lot of money to hire the person that knows how to build the satellite because they've got the pedigree. But that's not what I look for. What I look for is deep technical background, deep networks and experience in those industries, and a real fundamental understanding for how that industry's mechanics work because um, then from first principles they can create a strategy for go to market and all these other things that you would normally just have to hire out help for. And if that's not on a founding team, it's hard for me to see them going from 0 to 1, very quickly.
It feels almost like the way that you described that, like they should be teaching you about the physics of this product. Like they should be able to actually explain it simply, why and how to build this thing rather than like you explain to them.
They need to be the experts. If
Mhm.
if if I'm more educated on the topic than they are, then there's usually a problem. So I think it's incredibly important to be able to explain the physics. And I'm not saying they need to go around and explain the physics to everyone
Mhm.
because, there's just different levels of
Yeah.
understanding people need, right? And
They need to know how to play the show, right?
well, communication is really, really important, especially in deep tech, because if you can't communicate that in layers and levels that people can ingest and understand, it doesn't matter if you've cured cancer, like you'll never raise a dollar.
No, it's so true. You know what I was watching the other day when they did SpaceX's, they showed us inside the oh Jesus, the warehouse. It has a name, the Starbase, right? And
Mhm.
he's got the new Block 3 beside of him, and he's explaining, vision for the future, etc. We're going to use Block 3. We're going to get to Mars. These are the windows of opportunity. This is the cadence we need to be moving at. I watched a breakdown just because I couldn't understand the physics of all of it. And someone was explaining to me, or someone, I was watching the video, and they were showing how he would relate the complex principles of what they're doing at SpaceX to the most stupid things, right? Just to make it funny and engaging. Like comparing Starship to something that is a phallus almost, right? And it would make you smile and make you chuckle, but it gives you the image of why that thing needs to look like that, why they build it in a certain way. And so I agree, the communication aspect of it, especially with such complex products, is deeply needed.
Yeah, and I would also say we're kind of in this like interesting period of time where it feels like becoming an influencer can be more and more valuable in the eyes of others. And it's it's
Welcome to
it's
the show,
interesting.
Jeff.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting because I wouldn't have said that, 10 years ago in VC. Like I would have said that probably doesn't matter really because most of the world doesn't care about nuclear and you don't need to communicate it to most of the world. Like it's a waste of your time. Not quite the case anymore because, I think investments going a bit more retail, so you have more different interested parties that can participate. And so you really do need to be able to communicate it on a very simplistic level, like an influencer would. So it's interesting to see a lot of these executives have to sort of transform themselves from, somebody that was maybe a researcher or, you know, neck deep in an industry and really have to sort of elevate themselves above that so that they can communicate it to sort of the wider public.
I think it's, in the context of B2B SaaS as an example, it's a little bit easier to do, right? Because it's not such a complex product. You can sort of see the tangible outputs and outcomes. But when you are explaining a drone or explaining a rocket as an example or a satellite, that feels slightly more complex. In your opinion, what is the where does this whole distribution for VCs sort of end up stopping at? If everyone starts doing it, we get a flood of more content, etc. What's past that curve?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think we should probably note some of the major dynamics that are evolving the landscape right now in VC. So we've got, mega funds on one side, which looks a lot like consolidation.
Hmm.
Fewer funds are raising a larger share of the overall VC dollars. I think it was about 9 funds raised about half of all VC dollars last year, which is pretty wild. And many smaller, earlier stage funds disappearing at the same time. And then alongside that, we have sort of this big refocusing of VC back towards deep tech. It had historically been this tiny, tiny little sliver, maybe 10% for a long, long time. Now it's by some estimates closer to 35%. So that's a big shift away from SaaS and more traditional VC segments. So like what does that mean? Well, I think on the consolidation side, I do worry for some of the mega funds because the math doesn't exactly math.
Hmm.
You raise a $20 billion fund, that becomes increasingly more difficult to return the
Hmm.
larger the fund gets. And there might not even be enough exit for that kind of a fund.
Especially when we have
And
all of
the
these
life
IPOs backlog for the next 4 years in the New York Stock Exchange, as an example, and LSC isn't where people want to list anymore.
Well, that's the other problem is there's a backup. There's a problem with distribution still. LPs have not got those distributions, but what that also in turn causes them to do is go back to the mega funds, which feels safer, and because they seem more established, but not recognizing the increasing risk that they're creating by larger and larger funds. And so and then behind all of this, we have AI. And so, and so kind of going back to the idea that like some of these models could be better at picking successful startups. Um, I think we'll start to see competition from the smaller end of the market. Like I think folks like Elad Gil, who's a solo GP who's raised $1 billion fund. I think we could start to see more of that, especially because there are a lot of partners leaving these large funds because they're seeing issues with the return potential, and they think they can do it better, without being part of the mega fund and doing something smaller. So I think we'll start over the next couple of years, start to see more competition from the earlier stage end of the market. And I think it could hold its own.
Does that feel like a bubble to you?
I mean, VC is, it's all about bubbles in VC. Like that is sort of the name of the game.
Hmm.
The most successful funds sell into the bubbles, basically, is the idea. So does it feel like a bubble? Well, I think a lot of people might say that um, it is a bit of a bubble because we haven't seen the distributions. So a lot of these funds are just sort of unproven within this new focus of VC. And I would argue that's probably true because most VCs come from the software side of VC, and those playbooks simply don't translate. They're different industries with different dynamics, different players, networks, and you need to understand hard sciences and engineering versus software, which has a very low barrier to entry nowadays.
Do you have a timeline on how long this engineering age is going to live, like sort of exist for? Or do you feel that we're in this for a while and we're only at the nascent stage of it?
I look at it as just part of a new cycle,
Hmm.
and because the way I think about it is hardware begets software applications, begets hardware applications, and so on and so forth.
Cycle
I mean,
continues.
the easiest example I can think of is probably uh, we put touch screens on phones, and then all of a sudden we had this big keyboard we could use, and then
Hmm.
the whole surface was usable, and you could do more things with the phone. And all of a sudden we have this new, generation of applications on an iPhone that you couldn't have on a BlackBerry. And so you sort of see how the hardware begets applications. So I just think we had been sort of drunk on software eating the world for the last 20 some odd years. And I would argue that we're actually kind of paying for our sins today for not having paid attention to deep tech historically within VC. And what I mean by that is back in as early as like 2008, it was very, very clear that China was waging economic warfare on Western nations. They were subsidizing a lot of industries, but name at that time, namely the sort of climate industries, so solar, wind, LEDs, and they basically stole those industries while we were sitting there twiddling our thumbs about SaaS and like SaaS metrics and shit like that. And now everyone's talking about re-onshoring and nearshoring and stuff. Well, I argue we kind of did that to ourselves.
We
And
did.
the same people that were leaders back then are leaders today. And maybe they're not the ones that should be leading deep tech because they kind of blew it.
it's it's a really weird paradigm we found ourselves. We have created this world that we exist in, and obviously, like, it's true in every word. But the problems and all of the setbacks that we've had are because of us. It's because of the way that where we spent our time and attention, and You mentioned Thiel earlier, and I think his phrase is we've iterated on bits and not atoms. And we've forgotten about infrastructure, we've forgotten about hard tech, we've forgotten about deep tech. When we look at China today, what are you scared about, or like what do you keep a close eye on? Because it feels like they've industrialized AI in how they think about building both infrastructure for it as well as the technology. But I'd love to hear
Mhm.
your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, this dynamic was a very formative one for me, but going back to 2008, because I raised my hand and I said, "Hey, I think this will
Oh,
play out
you
poorly in
called
the
bullshit
future."
early.
Oh yeah, in 2008, I almost lost my job for being insolent because I raised my hand because my boss was like, "Price these solar panels. Tell me how much the competition is going to come in at." And I
Hmm.
said, "I can't. Like, there's so many subsidies. I can't put a price on these panels. Like, I don't know what the cost basis actually is." And that's where like I kind of raised my hand and said, "I think we have a problem here." And the issue at that time was nobody wanted to hear that. It was almost looked at as like conspiracy theory because the mantra at the time was globalism, and you know people were just head in the sands about all of this. And what gives me worry is the same thing back then as today, which is I think and believe that if you give up your technical advantage, you're basically giving up your competitiveness as a nation.
Hmm.
And that's something that China understood before the US and why they were fine letting the US outsource everything to them. And there's a lot of generational learning that comes with that that you lose over time. And that's what I worry about most is that we're still pulling the wool over our own eyes about all of this in terms of how we need to innovate and outpace innovation um, as compared to our competitors. And I think I think the simplest example of that is like there have been generations of VCs investing in drone companies that just they pop up and they fail, they pop up and they
Hmm.
fail, and it's for the same basic reason: the competition is beating them on cost. And it's it worries me that we still aren't smart enough as an investment community to see these sorts of issues because we don't need another drone company. We've got more than enough, but people still seem to be throwing money at it. And I see that same kind of what I call sort of retail brain, where it's
Hmm.
like if you just like watch the news, you might think that's a good investment, but if you actually do your homework and learn, how it all works, you might not think that. So like I worry that we're sort of stuck in this retail investing mode in the US and Europe with regard to deep tech, and we're not actually solving the bigger problems.
Do you think that we've overlooked Africa and India as superpowers because we're so focused on both ourselves in terms of innovating and this large block that is China?
Absolutely, the Belt and Road Initiative is something that has really taken advantage of those regions.
Hmm.
And I think that was just a completely missed opportunity by the US and Western nations because, you know, obviously there are historical issues with colonialism and those sorts of topics in Africa and India. But I think, in the modern era, there's ways to do that in a friendly manner so that, our near peer competitors aren't completely exploiting those systems to our disadvantage. A failed nation isn't ultimately what we want. That's just going to create security issues for everyone. So, I think that was a completely missed opportunity. And then, I still think the West needs to be better about cozying up to India because they are a great option outside of China for a lot of the kind of manufacturing and engineering talent that was revered in China. I would say I would argue you have a lot of that in India as well. And given the quality of relationships there, why wouldn't we do more? And I think companies like Apple have recognized some of that, but it's still a slow move. And it's a big evolution of taking everything that was in China and trying to get it to somewhere else. So um, I don't think it's lost though. I think there's a lot that can still be done. I just think we need to be more coherent. And the other thing is, a lot of times policy is focused around sort of appearing fair when I
Hmm.
don't believe that's sort of the geopolitical climate we're in. We need to we need to pick winners. And so what does that mean? That means not spreading, funding and subsidies and all that evenly. It's about finding the right companies to back and piling into them. So, hopefully we'll start to see more of that because I mean, even India is kind of under threat from China at this point. The DJI flying, drones over, the Himalayas, over Everest it was a bit of a flex in my mind. So hopefully, they've taken notice, and I think India wants to win as well. So why wouldn't we team up better with them?
1.6, I think it was 1.6. When I left India, it was 1.4. It's probably 1.6 now, billion people. It's an incredible country, and it's one of those few places I think that you actually have to go and see to get a sense check on the world, especially
Hmm.
Bangalore and Mumbai. And like if you can explore the middle India as well, so you get an understanding of like what is happening in that nation, because
Oh yeah.
you cannot, you absolutely cannot begin to understand the pace they move at and the aptitude and the culture there without actually going and living it. Like SF, you can sort of get a flavor without having been there because people talk so much about it. But I feel like that side of the world is you have to go and spend like a month there.
And I've invested in Indian startups before, and there's something that I find common amongst the founders I invest in,
Tell me.
amongst the founders in India, which is really low ego and super high intellectual horsepower.
Hmm.
Like this like deadly
I
combination.
love that intellectual horsepower. It's so true.
Yeah. And like I personally for a founder, I think that is a very potent combination. And like that's what I saw in Avas, founding CEO of Pixxel, which is a company that I invested in. And uh, I think a lot of that comes from, they don't have this like big, beautiful cash liquid market like the US does. There's a
They
bit more
hack
of
it
a struggle
together,
there.
they make it work.
Scrappy as hell, and I love that because that's kind of how you have to be successful in the startup world. And you know, not having any of the niceties kind of forces you into it. And it's no wonder there's so many successful Indian executives in the United States in Europe these days.
I think you just have to look at their space program as well. Didn't they launch a rocket for like 35 million USD?
Oh, I mean, the cost basis is incredibly competitive there. I mean that's exactly that was part of the thesis for investing in Pixel, was they could achieve similar or better imaging, but at a tiny fraction of the cost that anybody else could produce those satellites at. So
Hmm.
they would become a de facto winner.
I want to talk a little bit about space before we kind of like get into the final aspects of getting you or having you on the show. I hear you have a contrarian take on Mars.
I don't see any point in going to Mars.
Why? Isn't it just fun?
And it's fun to think about, but I like if the you if Earth is if Earth dies, I don't
Mm.
think we survive. Like we're not designed to survive off Earth.
You don't
Like
think one of us is going to build some Dyson rings? We're going to get, we're going to find a way to move the planet, etc., etc.
I don't think there's this like plethora of planets we can go live on. Like we can barely make it on Mars, and that's years away
Hmm.
just by rocket. The next closest one after that's even further. So it's like, is is that going to happen? Probably not, because our biology is just not designed to survive off of Earth. Like cancer will eat you alive long before we can get to the next planet. And I think what's also been overlooked is like how harsh of an environment space really is.
I
Like,
I don't think anyone begins to understand. Handful of people in the
yeah,
world,
like
right?
I mean, humans are not like. one solar flare and you're toast. Like and so like once you're past the magnetic field of Earth, like you're very exposed.
You're at
And
war
so
with the universe.
yeah. And so like I mean, I personally think it makes a lot more sense if these robots that everyone's making are so great to send those and not risk human life first, until we know we can actually survive there. But again, like, what's the point on surviving there? Like, what do we gain out of that at the end of the day? We're just on another rock sitting there with no resources that we have to like artificially produce. So it. I don't think it's analogous to like explorers crossing the oceans. I don't think it's the same thing. I don't see any net benefit to it for humanity other than
Do you
it's
see
a
a
great
net
story for Elon to raise money on.
do you see a net benefit for building rockets that can take payloads into space?
Not really, because Starship already does that decently well, and it can only really do LEO.
Hmm.
The idea that that's going to go to the moon is nonsense because it requires 20 some odd refuelings before it even gets to the moon. So like it's just not designed, the fuel system is not designed for that ship to make it to the moon in a comprehensible way. So it just like it just feels really far-fetched given the reality of where SpaceX today is and where they think they're going to go and what like like nobody like really has explained like why we need to go to Mars other than like for the safety of humanity. But it's like, okay, so explain to us how that actually works other than just using your rockets to get there. And there never seems to be an answer, which is like, I know a cheap street trick when I've seen one.
But don't pop my bubble, Jeff. I love seeing the rockets launch. Don't get me wrong. I love
I'm with you. There's nothing wrong with it.
the
I just think
chopsticks.
I just think there's a lot of moving the goalpost to raise more money, and people aren't any wiser for it.
But it sort of adds to that cycle, right? You know, he started and he's moving in a direction. Everyone wants to play catch up. That cycle will continue. Those VC dollars will, VC capital will kind of pummel itself in there, or in his way, it's his friends. For the rest of the world, it's, how can we find a way to do this scrappy? Um, and the cycle continues.
Well, I mean, Tesla is not anywhere close to the best electric vehicle you can buy today.
But
Um,
he's in the
it,
power in FSD. Like, that's the real kick.
but
That's
I
what
mean, they
makes
don't even
it.
have that. Like they're like faking it in Austin right now, and they still have to like
It feels
tele
like it's kind
and
of faking it, right?
well, it is faking it. Like they still have to like have people on teleoperation to make that work. Um,
Would you
and
go in there and actually just like let the car drive for you? I would scare the hell out of me right now. Imagine that happening in
well,
London.
no, I wouldn't actually because like I had a Tesla with full self-driving
Hmm.
a couple of years ago. I lived in a brand new neighborhood in Dallas, Texas, with big wide streets with newly painted lines in the road, and my self-driving could not make it out of my neighborhood. Like, and so when I saw
Really?
like that they're gonna have full self-driving, I was just like, well, I find that really hard to believe given my experience. And you know, I think he's really good at hyping people on marketing that has
Goes
a
back to
lot
that
of BS built
communication.
into it. Well, it's got a lot of BS built into it. Like he's been saying that have self-driving for more than a decade. Like, why would we believe him now? So it's
But
just like,
we're in that weird phase with technology. Before you jumped on, we were talking about this. It was the fact that we are buying the effects downstream consistently now with AI. So we are betting these models get better. We are betting everything gets better because technology has been woven into everything. Um, and so all of that benefit is going to be gained, what we hope because of the cycles and the cadence, very, very soon. But the reality is we're not too sure.
about full self-driving.
Well, full self-driving and, full self-driving with the application of, AI built into it. Obviously, it's machine learning, et cetera, built on top of the Tesla models, but more specifically that it will come very soon because we have this new powerful technology.
Um, maybe not. Like I think of full self-driving as a bit of a harder problem where there's not like this like silver bullet technology
Hmm.
because when we're driving, as humans, we're using a bunch of different sensors and cognition to make that happen. And I think, that full self-driving systems are kind of like that. It's not just one camera you're going to have that's going to enable you to do that, or one AI in a camera. It's going to be a suite of sensors and different processing to do that. And so I think part of it is, I mean, there are kind of like infinite edge cases, and so it's more about collecting those edge cases than anything. Um, I mean, it doesn't matter on the system architecture, but like I think it's the plethora of edge cases and understanding sort of like the world that's going to matter more. But that's not something that happens quickly or overnight. I think that's a hard problem that takes a long time to solve. And I think Waymo's a good example. They've been at this for, you know, decade more.
Hmm.
And they're only just starting to get there. So um, I also worry that like people are a bit drunk on sort of the marketed version of innovation. Like,
Ooh, we're in that phase now. Do you feel? I feel like that. I feel definitely we're in that phase for sure. This hyper attention marketing that everyone's doing.
yeah, well, I mean, Elon bought Twitter for a reason. Like, it wasn't like for free speech. I'm not dumb. Like, it was to market all his stuff. Like, it's it's the new version of a billionaire buying a newspaper, right?
Hmm.
And but this is where I think problems can be created through marketing, where people get the wrong idea about things. And um, I think that can actually stagnate innovation in a lot of ways, because then we end up investing in the wrong things and propelling the wrong leaders. And 10 years later, we're sitting there, none the wiser. I mean, I would argue that's what happened with AR VR. Like after Meta bought Oculus, basically it just put the pause on that entire industry. And like Meta's like showing off smart glasses the other day that could have been built a decade ago. I mean, I built glasses just like that a decade ago. Um, so yeah, I think that's where I get worried, is like those that kind of stagnation, I think is is what competitors love. Like that lets them pull out ahead, in that industry they have in China. So
Jeff, before we let you go, right? And I'm sure you've got a million calls to take in national security and defense. I've got a couple questions. We're going to do a rapid fire on this. You've been in the game a while of VC. Who do you look at and go like, that is someone I'd like not to emulate, but I look to and think, wow, I love the way that they invest in the context of VC.
I think the person who I appreciated most over the years is a guy named Bill Joy.
Hmm.
He was he invented the language. The Java language was part of the early team at Sun Microsystems. And then he was a team member over at Kleiner Perkins with John Doerr. Worked really closely with him for quite a while. Um, I got to sort of see him do his magic um, when I was looking at a battery company coming out of Carnegie Mellon many years ago. He eventually won the deal, and I lost out. But I kind of wore it as a badge of honor. And the reason like I found Bill Joy so amazing was this is the guy that came from sort of like computer science side of the world, but he was able to educate himself and go very deep on different areas of technology he shouldn't have known much about, but he was just a brilliant individual. And so when I went to go talk to him about this particular battery company, I felt like I was talking to like a battery engineer. I didn't feel like I was talking to a VC. And I was just so thoroughly impressed with how well he understood this technology. It was sort of at that point in my career when I decided I wanted to be more like that, because I think that gives him a durable edge.
What do you disagree with most on with regards to deep and hard tech?
Oh, I just Oh, I mean, I don't buy the notion that it takes more capital or takes longer. I think that's nonsensical. I don't think there's much evidence to that. I think there's actually a lot of evidence to the contrary. Anybody that thinks it's more capital intensive and takes longer, I question, their understanding.
Last question before we let you go. It's something that we ask all the VCs that come on the show. We really are trying to understand, how deep in it are you? I want two companies that you are not personally invested in, that you look at that are valued under 200 million, that you go, these are going to be generational companies.
that I'm not invested in.
Yeah, that you're not invested in. But then I'll give you one afterward that you are.
Okay. That I'm not invested in that I think will be generational companies that are under $200 million.
Yeah, we're
dollars.
trying to get them early.
Oh man, you're really putting me on the spot here.
That's what we do. That's why
Um,
we like live.
oh man, you're kicking my butt. I'm struggling a little bit. Um, I would say on the defense side, let's do something over there. Um, shoot, man, a lot of them are now like well over $200 million. Oh, okay. There is one that I'm not personally invested in. It's a company called Zona Space Systems.
Hmm.
So they are putting up a constellation of low Earth orbit satellites, and it's essentially a secure and more accurate version of GPS. And so it's like centimeter precision,
Damn.
but you can't spoof it or jam it either, which is a big problem with GPS today. And so it's my personal view that that kind of precision navigation is incredibly important, not just to the future of autonomy, but to, national security as well. And having that's a huge advantage over competitors. So um, I expect that we will see Zona really rise up through the ranks amongst, the defense, space and defense companies.
Give me one on national security side.
On the national security side. Um, okay, here's one. There's a company called Aurelius,
Hmm.
and what they do is they provide very proprietary data about people and people and organizations overseas that might be the government might want to know about or something like that. Um, and the reason I think this is important is because we have a thing called like open source intelligence, which is basically intelligence you can gather on the open internet and
Yep.
sort of synthesize. But going a layer deeper, there's a lot of proprietary data that people will want access to. And I think, it's my view that like most war isn't like fought on this sort of traditional front where there's armies and missiles being launched and all that kind of stuff. I think those are days past. I think war looks more like it happens on the intelligence front, and so I think we'll start to see a the rise of intelligence companies, not just ones providing software, but ones that are, a bit more integrated. This company Aurelius has really, really shown that they can provide that kind of data to the countries like the U.S. government, and I expect that will continue to grow into the future because I do think that's where more war is fought today.
All right. Give me one from the portcos. Give me one that you're personally invested in that you love. You're loving at the moment. I'm sure you love them all
Uh,
equally.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's hard to overlook Castilian. They're a hypersonic missile company led by a gentleman named Brian Hargis, who's a SpaceX alum, who's a legend in the industry. Brian is one of those people that again fits that model of low ego, super high horsepower, and just has and he and his team have the technical depth that is very, very, very rare. And no surprise that I think everyone else saw that, and they've been able to raise hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 12 months, and really sort of separate themselves from the rest of the pack. So yeah, Castilian, they're doing great. They're very much a leader in their category, and looking forward to them building and becoming larger. Um, Mainly because I think the best way to avoid war is deterrence, and I
Hmm.
think they are a great show of power.
Jeff, this has been an absolute pleasure. I will actually be stealing the engineering horsepower from you. I most definitely
All yours.
that phrase I am absolutely using to hear it all over the internet from now. This has been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you for having
That's all right. Keep up with the YouTube videos I'm watching.
me. Well, I hope you enjoy them.
I absolutely do. Thanks for the time, Jeff. Ciao.